But all of this explosion of knowledge began to occur. And of course, not only did the God in the sky disappear, but man, as a little lower than angels, became man, as or humans, as the top of the chain of development of mammals. And that development hadn't stopped. When Wanda and I were working with the Aboriginals in Australia, we worked with an ancient tribe of Aboriginals in Western Australia. And we always had these anthropologists coming up and wanting to interview these people. And one set of anthropologists came up to measure their jaws. And they spent all day taking the old men and the old women out and measuring their jaws, because they had 4 extra teeth. And their jaws were longer. If you look at some of the pictures of ancient Aboriginals or older Aboriginals even today, some of them have the extended jaw. It juts out like that because they got extra teeth. And they found that the younger Aboriginals, especially those who had mixed with the Westerners, no longer had those extra teeth. And it was evolving. The world changes. Not only did Darwin's understandings begin to spread and began to develop the biological sciences, but Freud came along and began to look inside and understand that people had a God complex, and that God complex was there because it helped in or control their fears about the fact that they weren't always going to be here. And that could be controlled by anger and by fear. And we could threaten people with hell and make them, straighten up, but we could also relieve them of their fears by promising that when they die, will go to heaven. And all of that became explored by Freud and began to go down the drains. And then Jung came along and was a little nicer about it, but principally had the same thing to say. And then the turn of the last century saw another fellow came on the scene by the name of Einstein. And kind of in a dream one day, he saw E equals mc squared. And so time and space, which was supposed to be fixed, became relative. And could speed up and could slow down. And out of that kind of understanding, things began to explode. And people began to get long-distance telescopes and look out and see that the universe wasn't just the Earth and the Sun and a few little planets around there, but was ever expanding. And also, a new understanding about knowledge began to occur. There had been a time when even scientists of an earlier period thought that there was a finite amount of knowledge to be learned. And so if you learned this, well, then you didn't have to, learn it again, and all of the other things would be reduced by one. And if you learned something else, then you would, and they believed that finally that we would know everything because we would gradually discover. But then when Einstein came around and several other scientists, they began to find out that when you discovered one thing, what happened? There were 5, 10, 20 other things out there that was unknown. And that when you discovered one thing out of that, there were 5, 10, 20 things. And so knowledge began to expand as the universe, the understanding of the universe began to expand. And the old theology didn't fit anymore. And the church, in a number of forms, felt that they had to fight that, and they lost. Every single time they lost. It may surprise some of the women here that we didn't discover that women had eggs that made children until about the 15th century. You realize that? And so women in the old religion some of them didn't think they even had a soul, because the only thing they were here for was to put the seed of the man in to produce a child. Through science, we came to see a whole new understanding of society and what it means to be a human being. And the possibilities of this began to explode. And religion, particularly the institutional versions of religion, began to fade. And that's true now. You just look around you. And not only with Christianity, but with other forms of religion. Religion is looked as, by a lot of people, as being very violent and very devious. A block to progress. What has that got to do with us, and what has that got to do with Jesus? Well, if you go back and you read the scriptures very carefully, you'll understand that the Hebrews had a pretty tough time. I mean, they made it out of Egypt. And they began to develop an idea that they were the center of the universe. We read some of the Psalters. They felt like they had it, and God was their God and not anybody else's God. And then in 586, a terrible thing happened. 586 BC. The Babylonians came and jerked them out of Jerusalem, scattered many of them, and took their leadership back to Babylon with them. And you can go back and read about that. And how can we sing the songs of Zion when we're no longer there? We weep by the river of Babylon. And their religion was crushed. And when they came back very differently. And there was a real division amongst them. For there were those who wanted to go back to the old ways and to pretend that they were number one. But the Romans kind of had them pushed down. And so there were those who said, you know, if we stick with it long enough, we will overcome the Romans and we'll be number one again. And we can stick out our tongue at everybody else.